Now, I want to go back to discussing egocentricity as a type of bias in the decisions that we make. In particular, I want to introduce you to a study where participants were asked to tap the rhythm of a song to a listener, and then we're supposed to assess the probability that the listener will correctly identify the song. And I think this just calls for you to pause your video right here and do this yourself. Do this tapping study yourself. Come up with a song to tap out for 10 seconds or more, and then make a public a priori prediction for how long you think it takes for an audience member to guess it correctly. And then I suggest you call someone, get them in on this experiment, or maybe on Zoom with some friends, do this. Tap your song and have your audience guess and see if you're right. We can, however, take a look at what the data says. And take a look at the proportion of people guessing correctly. First of all, the predicted proportion of people guessing correctly by the tappers. And people thought that a correct guess, well, should be something like a coin flip, right? It should be kind of 50-50. Actual listeners who were uninformed really performed very badly in the study, so they're very bad at guessing the song correctly. But informed listeners were on the same level as the tappers themselves in terms of actually predicting the song. So if I tell you what my song is that I'm tapping out, then you will probably you will be at the you will predict that that you can guess it correctly. Now, what do we have here? We have basically some tension between, on the one hand, some naive realism, assuming that you see the world as it is, you must be correct. And on the other hand, something like a theory of mind, something like an understanding that others have different thoughts, different beliefs, and then they see the world through different eyes than you. And this is something that basically starts developing from 4 years of age. But it seems like even as adults, our sort of naive realism can still taint our picture of the world. Here is another example. In this study, participants were confronted with this problem. So the problem goes like this. John tries to tie the ends of 2 ropes to each other, but cannot reach them both. There are some objects in the room, and you can see we have a candle holder, we have a pear, we have a light bulb, and we have a chair. And how difficult is it for John to solve this problem? That's the question that participants were asked, and they were supposed to rate this on a 4-point scale. So very easy to very difficult. Now, without cheating and scrolling ahead, if you think about whether you know the solution to this problem, maybe you should do this rating task yourself. Do you think this is an easy thing to do, or do you find this hard to figure out? And now compare it to this situation, in which I tell you the text is John tried to tie the ends of 2 ropes to each other because he could not reach both. He connected the candle to the one rope and swung it while walking to the other rope. And then, now that you know this, the trick to solving this problem, what would you think? How difficult was it to solve this problem? Well, surely the score that you would give the difficulty now is much lower, right? It would feel now like this is a much less difficult problem. So this goes to basically illustrate the curse of knowledge. You can't unthink something. And once you know the solution to this problem, it will, and in this study it did, make participants feel like the problem was easier to solve than it was for them if they hadn't known the solution to it. So that's also basically a facet of egocentricity bias, being unable to forget something new that we learned, and then it kind of automatically gets integrated into our perception of the world. Another facet of the egocentricity bias is the so-called spotlight effect. And in this study, participants were asked to wear either a shirt with Barry Manilow on it, and you can see a picture of him right there, or a t-shirt with a self-picked famous person. And then they were asked to walk into a room where other participants were filling out questionnaires. And participants were asked how many people they thought would notice the face on the t-shirt. And again, you can already guess that there would be a prediction here that people think both for the Barry Manilow t-shirt and the t-shirt of choice that many people will see the picture. So around about half of the people were thought to be able to see the picture, but in actuality, much less people actually realized or saw that this picture was going on. So we believe ourselves to be in the spotlight more than we actually are, and we might feel watched, or we might feel like people are paying attention to stuff that's bothering us, or that makes us feel sort of uncomfortable or stands out to us, even though they actually aren't, and they or to a lesser degree than we predict. Another study where the spotlight effect was highlighted was one where participants were asked in a group discussion to discuss the problem of inner cities in the United States. And afterwards, after this group discussion, they were supposed to rate themselves and other group members based on their negative and positive contributions to the discussion. Now, we can take a look at the difference in what participants thought their standing was going to be like in the eyes of others compared to participants' actual standing in the eyes of others. So basically we can here directly compare how much participants thought they were going to be in the spotlight in this discussion. And we have available data from 6 dimensions that are plotted here. The first 4 are a rank. So participants were supposed to say how they thought they ranked in the eyes of the others in terms of advancing the discussion. So participants thought they would be ranked by the others higher than they were actually ranked in terms of the speech errors and offensive comments and judgments, comments judged critically. And in all these cases, we can see that both for positive and for negative items, participants thought they would be ranked higher than they actually were. Now for the last 2 dimensions, for how remarkable their comments were and for how much percentage of the time they were talking, participants thought that they would get higher ratings from others than they actually did get from others. And again, this would point to the spotlight effect. So participants believe they take up more space in the spotlight, basically, than they actually do. So the spotlight doesn't shine quite as brightly and also not quite as kindly on people as they believe. But still, and this is what we can see from the last column here, if we take a look at the mean correlation between predicted and actual behavior, we can see that there are correlations, right? It's not like participants' judgments or what they think others think of them and what others actually think of them. It's not like there's no relation between the two. So the spotlight effect is grounded in reality, but participants still overestimate how much they are going to be in the spotlight. Next, for egocentricity, let's take a look at the false consensus effect. So the spotlight effect, we've said, means that people overestimate to the extent to which others note our appearance or our action. The false consensus effect is about the overestimation of the extent to which others are similar to oneself. I do X, and anybody who says he doesn't is lying. That's kind of the idea behind the false consensus effect. We could also call this social projection. Let's take a look at one study that went after the false consensus effect. And in particular, this is a study that was actually quite involved. So participants were asked to walk around campus for 30 minutes wearing sandwich board signs saying, "Eat at Joe's." And they were asked to keep a record of the number of people who say something to them, the sex of the people who say something to them, and to note the valence of the comment. And then they were asked whether they would go eat at Joe's. Oh no. Now let's take a look at a study that went after this false consensus effect, or that kind of helps us to demonstrate it. In this study, some participants were asked to walk around campus for 30 minutes wearing a sandwich board sign saying "Eat at Joe's." And they were asked to keep a record of the number of people who said something to them, the sex of the commenters, and the valence of the comment. And other people were not asked to wear this sign. And then the question in the end was whether people think that others would wear the sign, depending on whether they had worn it themselves. So if we take a look at the data, here is the guesses or the estimates of following the question: what percentage of your peers do you estimate would agree to carry the sandwich board around campus? And then again, like I said, we have participants who either wore the sign or who didn't wear the sign. And you can see that participants who wore the sign expected that others, the majority of others, would also wear the sign. And participants who didn't wear the sign expected that the majority of others wouldn't wear the sign. So this would be, if I do it, everyone else will do it. If I don't do it, everyone else, or at least the majority, will also be expected to do it. Therefore, an example of false consensus. Now, the false consensus effect doesn't always appear. The way we frame the question, or the way we frame a situation, can give rise to more egocentric bias, more false consensus effect. So if we present a question in a general or rather vague manner, there's lots of room for false consensus effect to take place. Whereas if a question is rather specific in how it's formulated, there's less wiggle room for a consensus effect to take hold. For instance, whether I ask you if you prefer French or Spanish food as compared to whether you prefer escargot or tapas. And there's also a study that made use of this idea, where 100 students were asked general questions where we would expect room for bias, such as whether they prefer the color tan or aqua, if they preferred an American snack or European snack, and if the American food or Italian food would be their preference for the last meal. And on the other hand, we had 100 students being asked specific questions, that means with little room for bias. They were asked to pick between these specific two colors. They were asked to indicate whether they would prefer apple pie or chocolate mousse, and if for their last meal they would prefer fried chicken or veal parmigiana. And if we take a look at the data here, we can see that we have the predicted percentage of other students choosing the option 1 for students who either preferred option 1, the light bars, or preferred option 2, the dark bars. So now if you know nothing about other people, you would, regardless of the choice that you make, you would think that probably between the two options, other people have different tastes, and therefore there's a uniform distribution, right? It's like a 50-50 chance that people will prefer tan over aqua, because why wouldn't they? It's not like objectively tan is the better color. But participants who, in the general scenario, themselves chose aqua, so bar 1, whatever in the color scenario, would think that it is more likely that others choose the same. And that was also the case for the snack condition, and with a smaller difference in the last meal condition. But in the specific question phrasings, we can see there's barely any difference between between the two bars in the three across the three conditions, across the three types of questions. So in the specific question, we can see that we're closer to this kind of half-half distribution that we would have expected. And this means we have some indication here that indeed egocentricity bias or the false consensus effect actually kicks in when there's a lot of room for interpretation, while if it's actually the situation is so specific, then there's not a lot of wiggle room for false consensus effect to take place.